at to you, Saints fans. We're coming at you late. It's 10:30 at night, but we had to wait because we had to get the pick in. And surprisingly, one of the biggest surprises of the first round is not the Lions taking a running back that could have been there in the third at pick 12. And no, it wasn't Atlanta also taking a running back when their defense is as porous as the sponge sitting on your grandma's sink. The New Orleans Saints did not trade up, sat at pick 29 and ended up with Bryan Bresee, defensive tackle, out of Clemson. Now, this is a very New Orleans Saints pick. It's also a very probably going to be contentious pick for a lot of people. We're very curious to see what everybody says. Now, how the NFL draft has gone is going to be a big thing that we probably talk about here. And keep in mind that the Saints are picking in, 10 more picks from this point. You've got the Eagles who are picking as we're doing the pod, and the Saints are back at pick 40 with still several names available that you can see them look at, whether that's Steve Avila at guard, even Joey Porter Jr. is still available. Probably my best available player overall on my personal sheet at corner. He's still available. You've got Will Levis who's still available that some people like. I mean, hey, at this point in the first, early second, why not? Who says no? I know a lot of players or fans love Nolan Smith. He's currently available, though, as I'm making this podcast, would not shock me if he ends up going to the Eagles. I mean, it just seems like the Eagles can get nothing but rich right now. They've come off a Super Bowl appearance and managed with Jalen Carter. But let's go ahead and talk about it. Woof. Welcome in, New Orleans Saints fans. How are you doing? A good shout out to those who are here. Ready for us is Justin, Bim, DeQuinton, Richard, Nikki DeFish, Mark, let's see, TJ, Ted, oh gosh, Lance, good to see all y'all. Bob, Daniel, Ted, Cam, Saints for Life 94, love the name. Oh man, Creole King, Abraham, everybody welcome in Who Dat to you. Now, I really have if you just go ahead and get my personal things out, I think that Bryan Bresee is a very talented player with high upside, but he also has a lot of negatives coming in terms of, hey, you'd like to see more development out of this guy. But I don't think it's a bad pick. I think for pick 29, one thing that I want to get out of the way is, and we've talked about him before, he was my number 3 DT, arguably number 2, depending on how you fell on the whole Kalijah Kancey argument. There are no first-round picks really left. And what I mean by that is when it comes to grading, when you go to actual boards that teams make, 15, 20, max 25 players, I doubt Bryan Bresee has a first-round grade for New Orleans, but it's who they take because that's probably the best available, and then they also maybe consider need there. We've talked about that before because Joey Porter's available, but the Saints also have 3 young corners that they really, really like, including one that they've paid a big payday to. So when you're looking at that and then you look at your defensive tackle depth, which your 3 tech right now, your starting 3 tech is either Malcolm Roach or a guy who wasn't even on the team last year who's a rotational player. So you probably were going to end up in this direction if that was kind of your choice. So I don't have a big issue with it, but we will get y'all's opinion. What we'll do real quick is rattle off some of the things he does well. Is also rattle off some of the things that maybe he needs to improve on. Things to think about. He is a guy that, for me, would have had a second-round grade, but also look at this and say, expect it, because you don't expect to find a guy at pick 29 who's secretly an amazing first-round pick. He did have a 9.6 RAS score, relative athletic score. He's a hyper-athlete at the 3-tech position. Very natural fit at 3-tech in terms of height, weight, speed. He is, 6'5 and a half, long body, but 300 pounds. 10-inch hands with 32.5-inch arms, slightly shorter length in the arm, but he makes up for that by having the length, which he can use to his advantage, but that does bring some negatives that you have to worry about as well. One of the problems you have to worry about with that high length is he will play with high pad level. We've talked about that a little bit when it came to the pre-draft process. He could play with high pad level, which makes it difficult to regain leverage if you lose it early on. He also doesn't have the most amazing stat line, which I know is important to some people when it comes to reading stat lines at the beginning of and end of the season. And he probably doesn't have the range a lot of people are looking at. But again, as an interior guy, stuff to like. And then you come to what I've harped on, the red flags for injury. We talk about the ACL tear, the shoulder injury. These are the biggest reasons to be concerned. It's the big reasons that I wasn't super excited about him. But as a player that fits New Orleans, he fits a lot better than Kalijah Cansey. He fits a lot better than a couple of the DTs remaining for what New Orleans needs. So, for example, Keanu Benton is still available, but he's more of like this weird hybrid between one tech and three tech. So, in terms of New Orleans needing a three tech, which is exactly what they need, Bresee is the guy. And he was the best available at that position. And if you look, your Tampa Bay Buccaneers inside your division of getting Kalijah Cansey. If you liked him, he ended up going earlier than most people expected, whereas a lot of names that people expected to maybe go early have started to fall. Nolan Smith is falling. We've already mentioned the quarterback in Will Levis who's falling. We've got Joey Porter Jr. falling. Brian Branch, arguably the best safety, falling. So several names that are coming down. Nikki DeFish's odds the Saints move back into the first round. I would say the odds moving back into the first at this point for New Orleans are slim to none. There's no real advantage here. I mean, who do you really think deserves that fifth-year option? That's what you would be trading up for. Not saying it can't happen. Not saying it's a problem. Just seems a little bit unlikely. Doesn't mean at all, though, that it cannot happen. I think it's quite possible to move up, but you're already picking at 40. And if y'all saw, there was a little bit of a kind of like I wouldn't call it a fire sale if you're Jacksonville, but man, they were driving up the price, and New York paid a pretty hefty penny to go up and get Deonte Banks, the corner out of Maryland, because apparently a lot of people were vying for that. And I also think that you have an instance where Cincinnati might have taken who New Orleans would have. So pick 29, Cincinnati took Myles Murphy. Pick 28, Cincinnati took Myles Murphy, who I think that New Orleans probably would have gone in that direction instead of Bryan Bresee, but they would have probably taken either one of those guys very likely. Let's get some comments here from the chat. We'll go into the scouting report a little bit more. Lodge says, how do you compare him to Smith from Michigan? Two completely different types of players. The thing with Mazi Smith, I talked about this a lot in the pre-draft process. He's a one tech, right? He's a nose tackle, big gap stuffer. He's a one gap nose tackle. He's playing the A gap, whereas Bryan Bresee's a natural B tech penetrator. If he can stay healthy, the upside that he has is tremendous. The question, though, is back to that whole health argument. How is he going to stay? Can he remain healthy from the shoulder, from the ACL that he's had before? And if he can be a healthy player and develop as you want him to, he's got a lot of upside, and he fits what New Orleans needed more than Mazi Smith does. Even though I liked Smith, I've also been one of those guys. There's a few positions that I personally would never take in the first round. I don't take running backs, I don't take tight ends, and I don't take nose tackles in the first round. That's just me personally. Now, Funny Guy says, hate it, probably would have been there in 11 picks. And I don't honestly know if that's the case, Ben. And one thing that we see that happens is runs on positions. If you notice, you had Mazi Smith, DT, I know one tech versus three tech, but he just went. Then you had Myles Murphy, another defensive line, then Bryan Bresee. You see positions have runs. Wide receiver went 4 in a row. So I think if you're New Orleans, you can't guarantee that would have sustained, but I understand the logic there. Again, for me, it's, does this fit New Orleans? It does. This is a very good fit for New Orleans, and you have to consider that when you look at the picks. I don't really think that there's a ton of players who were better in terms of value for New Orleans. There were a couple, but then you go into the, yes, take best player available, but if you got high grades on multiple guys, you also lean to position of need. I think that Joey Porter's a better overall football player, but you also have already got 3 very good corners. Now, if you didn't have Bresee there and Murphy was also gone, and now you're picking between a whole bunch of other guys, then maybe you do go ahead and take corner. But we'll just have to wait and see. We'll get some more chats in. Love it. Love everybody. Laura says, Myles Murphy was on the board. The Saints would have taken him. I think quite possibly they would have. Hot Boy says, I'm surprised Nolan Smith is still available. If y'all listen to any of my podcasts for the past 2 months, y'all shouldn't be surprised that Nolan Smith's available, because what have I told y'all? Tweener players struggle to find teams in the first round. If you are a tweener, which is exactly what Nolan Smith is, you're going to have a handful of teams that love you. Not every team in the league. And I've said this. You're going to have the problem being a tweener that unless you have teams that love you, you're not even going to be on some teams' boards. I even said this on Twitter. I don't believe that Nolan Smith is even on New Orleans' first-round radar, like not even close. You probably would have had 10 other picks before Nolan Smith to New Orleans. Doesn't mean it's impossible. But when I look at the type of player, tweener players struggle to get attention from every team, and that's going to be his issue. I'm not saying that there are teams that don't like him. I 100% do. And again, I said at the beginning of the show, I wouldn't be surprised if Philly ends up picking him. And if that ends up happening while we're doing the show, wealth of riches over there. But it's not surprising to me to see that happening. It's really not. I expected him to fall because he's a tweener player, and we'll see what ends up happening as we go through it. Richard says, what are the strengths of Bryan Bresee? We did kind of go over quickly the negatives. One thing that I think is big about him is great athletic build. I mean, high-end athlete, very nice inside penetrator. I think that he's a good mental processor, as in you can see that he recognizes blocking schemes. He understands inside zone, outside zone, the different anchor sets that he's going to face going against guards. He recognizes that very, very quickly. I think that he does a really good job using his length to stop double teams. That's actually one of the things that I knocked about Kalijah Cansey. Cansey is not a guy that's coming into the league as an elite, well-rounded player, even though Cansey has elite traits. Cansey has ridiculously elite traits as a pure penetrating pass rusher, but not as a well-rounded 3-tech, whereas Bresee does have those traits as a well-rounded guy. He does great in run fits. I think that he's a very good interior pass rusher, though he doesn't have the same level of elite upside you've seen from the Jalen Carters and the Kalijah Canseys. But he definitely is a good pocket pusher. He uses power to win, but he also has pretty good reps in terms of countering and coming with a various style of technique. I do think that he's one of the better stack and shed interior defensive linemen. Probably the only one that I'd say is better than him at stacking and shedding at the point of attack is Jalen Carter, who I thought is probably the best player in the entire draft. So if he can stay healthy, which is a big thing, I think Bresee's a guy who can contribute and play a lot in the backfield, which is what you want. He just doesn't have as many of those boxes ticked, and he does have that big red flag on the medical that you do have to worry about. Jimbo says, legit wonder who will be celebrating this pick in week 8 of the season. It depends, Jimbo. I have always been, and at least I'm accurate about it. I have personally always been, the trenches is where you invest the most of your money. I'm okay with that. Now, sometimes you miss. Marcus Davenport didn't pan out because of injury. Peyton Turner hasn't panned out at all, and we don't even know what's going on with that one. But I have no problem investing in the trenches. It pays off, and I think that's okay. Is it exciting? No, but it's like eating your vegetables. It's good for you. Even if you don't like it, you need it, and I'm okay with that. Now, I did just see that the Philadelphia Eagles did indeed get Nolan Smith. So Philly just continues to load up with elite talent. But you know what? Philly actually uses a lot of those tweener type players, so it works out for them. It's actually perfect. And I hate it because I don't want Philly to keep being this dominant NFC team, but also, it makes a ton of sense. They get Nolan Smith and Jalen Carter. Wow. Oh, gosh, it just makes me sick. But it is what it is. It is what it is. Do the Saints want to go far this year? I'm legit wondering. Yeah, Lester. I mean, I think this is the type of move that a team makes when they are trying to go far. Because if they're not trying to go far, why not go ahead and take the quarterback? Right? Like, I was not a big fan. Like, I'm not a huge Will fan because I don't think that he's ready for year one in the NFL. But if you're not trying to contribute right now, you probably take him and say, hey, maybe we can develop him. And in 3 years, 2 years, we turn this guy loose and we rebuild our team. When you take a Bryan Bresee pick, that is you investing in your team right now. He just says, so why not Nolan? Simple answer. Nolan doesn't fit New Orleans at all. Just simple. And that doesn't mean he's a bad player. I'll be very clear. I love Nolan Smith. I do think that his tape doesn't match the hype all the time, but I like him. But he doesn't fit Nolan, or it doesn't fit New Orleans at all. New Orleans does not use the weak side tweener pass rusher who comes up as a down backer and pass rusher. They just don't do that. That's not Dennis Allen's defense. If they wanted that, they would have kept Kay Nellis. They didn't want that. Again, I'm not saying he's bad, and I'm not saying that he's going to be bad in the NFL, but I am saying that he doesn't fit the team at all. Now, a lot of people I see in chat are bringing up New Orleans' struggle with medical histories and their own team doctors and stuff, and that I'm not even going to bother refuting. I've been very clear, and there are plenty of podcast episodes the past 3 months where I've been very clear that my biggest concern on Bryan Bresee was not his ability on the field, but his medicals. And that's actually why I was not sold on him, or technically am not super sold on him long term, but I still see why it works. And if he's healthy, I think it ends up working to New Orleans' favor. But that's the question. That's the question. The ACL tear was September 2021. So you're about a year and a half away from an ACL tear. And then you had shoulder surgery, like what, 4 months after that ACL tear. It was like January 2022. The good news is you're over a year past all of that. The bad news is it's within 2 or 3 years. So it's all about what can you find. You know, some of the biggest negatives that if you watch Clemson tape, they move guys around on that D line a lot. And you would see Bresee even having snap opportunities on the outside. And I don't think he's really suited for that. But as a 3-tech, it makes a lot of sense. It's not exciting, but it makes a lot of sense for New Orleans. So let's keep going through. Who do you think the Saints should take in the second round? Randall, man, I'm curious to see who ends up being available after we wrap up the draft today, because Kansas City still has not made their final pick. I'll tell you who's available right now that I would be A-okay with taking in the second round. I'm going to give you a whole list of names. Mike Myers or Mike Mayer. Mike Myers too, sure. Mike Mayer. Will Levis would be fine. Joey Porter Jr., if he's still available. Brian Branch out of Alabama, I'd be okay with. Steve Avila, I'd be okay with. Yes, I just rattled off a guard. Osiris Torrance, I'd be okay with. Keon White out of Georgia Tech, I would be okay with. Trying to think of anybody else. Honestly, Jonathan Mingo out of Ole Miss, I'd be okay with. I know not everybody will agree with all those. That's completely fine. That's just me rattling off some names of who I would be okay with. Chris says Mickey Loomis has to go. I don't know, man. I mean, personal opinion, of all the years you get mad at Mickey Loomis in the draft, this isn't the one. My personal opinion. Personal opinion. I completely understand if you want to say Mickey Loomis needs to go when they trade up for the 14th overall pick and everybody in the world is convinced they're taking Lamar Jackson, they take Marcus Davenport. I'm cool with it then. Cool with it then. This year, I don't understand. But your opinion is more than welcome. Marie says that we don't have the best history of helping players who have been injury prone, suddenly becoming less injury prone. And agreed. I'm not here to argue that. Look, when it comes to player evaluation, when you're scouting, what you do is you look at the tape, you take traits, you find what traits a player is good at or elite at. You will also mark what somebody is bad at. But when it comes to medicals, all you do in a scouting report is you basically check a box and you put a red flag there. You make it known. And beyond that, it's outside your control. As a scout, all you can do is evaluate a player and say what they do well and how they fit your team. So that's all I can do. That's what I was trained to do. I can't speak on medicals. I don't have a medical degree. I can't explain why New Orleans struggles more with certain injuries than other teams. Now, there is a potential correlation with the fact that New Orleans is a dome team on turf, which does seem to be a problem for so many different teams in so many different sports. What I can tell you is why the traits say that Bresee fits New Orleans really well. But I won't argue that New Orleans has struggled with injury problems in the past. They've struggled with helping players get over injuries as quickly as we think they should. Yeah, I'm here for that. And if you want to make that argument of why you don't select Bryan Bresee, that's completely okay. But all I can tell you is why Bresee fits New Orleans very well and the pick makes sense. It's a completely justifiable to argue against that based on other things. Completely okay. Daniel says, Bryan Bresee has good instincts, quick hands, and size. I think he'll start as a sub and on pass rush downs, third, medium, fourth, long. I'll be honest, Daniel Blunt. I think Bryan Bresee is a 3-down starter immediately. I think he's a 3-down starter. You might have him in for 2 downs. You might rotate him. Now, by a 3-down starter, I still expect him to only play 60% of the snaps, maybe 65. But I still think he's going to be doing a lot more than just being a 3rd-down guy coming in. I really do. Doesn't mean I think he's bad or anything. I just think that, 1, New Orleans has nobody. And 2, he's that type of a player. Like, he fits the style. His style. Going to need a receiver after Thomas gets hurt in game 3. Well, that's fine. And I rattled off a receiver if you're here for it. I do think that there's still a receiver that fits the style or the position that New Orleans would need. That's probably 2nd round. And there's probably only one, and that is Mingo. I don't really think there's any receiver left that I would say fits that split end position that's a 2nd round player. Mingo's probably the only one. I'm trying to think if there's another one that I would take. Maybe Cedric Tillman. Maybe Tillman. Tillman might be one that's in that same conversation, but like Mims is not in that conversation for me. At least to play Michael Thomas's split end position. I'm not saying they're bad. I'm just saying to split that play that position. Josh Downs is not one of those guys I would take if I'm New Orleans based on what I have on the roster and what I need and who's the best player for my team's fit. Tillman and Mingo would probably be the two that I think fit New Orleans the most out of right now, of who's available. There are other names, but those are probably my top two of who's available. Just trying to think if there's anybody else that I would really throw up there. I can't think of anybody like that I would just throw up there. But again, I'm specifically talking about a split in. So, Drew says, oh, we got another injured D-line just like Peyton Turner. Our medical staff is terrible. Maybe, Tristan. All we can do is hope for the best. All we can do is hope for the best. Byron, though, says, this shows me how much they believe in Peyton Turner since they didn't go after an edge rusher. I will say there wasn't really an edge rusher to go after. I just want to make that clear. I don't think that this has anything to do with Peyton Turner because I do think that they would have taken Myles Murphy had Cincy not just taken him. I just want to make that argument, personal opinion. I don't think that had anything to do with it. Now, I do believe, and I've said this about last year. I said this, and I told you about this with Cesar Ruiz. Third year matters for every player. Peyton Turner, third year matters. You give him 3 years. Now, whether he pans out or not, you don't know. But you give a player 3 years. This is his year 3. You see if anything happens. You wait and see. Who knows? B. Will says Tank Dell. Personally, would not take Tank Dell in the second round. Tank Dell is not, I'm not saying he's a bad player. Love his explosion, but he's a slot guy. I don't think you take that in the second round. George says, how good do you think Bresee is as a pass rusher? I think Bresee is better as a run stopper than a pass rusher in terms of move set and understanding. But I think that Bresee is a good pass rusher. I'll be honest. I think that Bresee comes to this team and is the best interior pass rusher on the team. I know that's a low bar because New Orleans doesn't really have anybody on the D-line right now. But I do think he's the best interior rusher you have, and he has room to grow. There's things that he can get better at. But he's also a very well-rounded player, which is what New Orleans needed. You know, I'm not saying New Orleans doesn't need pass rush because they do. But what I am saying is where they struggled the most last year was run stopping, particularly along the interior. And they just got significantly better in that by bringing in Saunders and drafting Bresee. Bresee also is a guy who I do think has a very good upside as a pass rusher. He's not as well refined as Jalen Carter or Kalaji Kancey as a pass rusher, but he still has elite athletic traits and he has really good power and has the athletic ability to have added movesets to become a better pass rusher while already being a good pass rusher now. The real questions for Bresee is twofold. One, the injuries, and two, the frame. Can he manage to stay healthy and work on the pad level? I think that's the biggest thing he needs to work on. Other than that, though, yeah, I think he's a good pass rusher for what was available. You think Keon White might be available at 40? I think right now, just about anybody you name could be available at 40 because that's only 10 picks away. Kansas City ended up taking Felix Uzoma, which I don't think fit New Orleans anyway as an edge because he's a little bit undersized for what you see DA typically go for. So if you're looking for who's available from a defensive end edge perspective, from what the Saints typically would go for, there are a couple guys still available, with Keon White being one of those guys who fits Dennis Allen's style, who also has really nice ability, but he's raw. He needs things to develop. Honestly, Keon White reminds me a lot of like a Peyton Turner / Marcus Davenport style of a pick, but now you're not taking him in round 1. But I do think he's a top 50 player in this draft. I think that's what you're looking for. But that's just one example. You've still got Edibore, who also fits what New Orleans is looking like. I think that he's got really good athletic ability. I think his upper body strength is fantastic. He's a very quick player. I like him. I really do. I really like Edibore to New Orleans if that's what they want to do, go back-to-back defensive line and really address some struggles that they currently have in that defensive line room, which you just feel like there's a lack of talent. You still got depending on what you wanted to do. If you wanted to go defensive end, you've still got I wouldn't want to say Byron Young, but he's also a little bit too undersized for New Orleans. But you got Foskey, who's slightly undersized, but a very New Orleans type pick because of the athletic ability. You've got the guy out of USC who I can't pronounce his last name, but just to rattle off, players' positions at defensive end. But yeah, Jonathan Mingo to fill that big slot role. I'll be honest, Bryson, Jonathan Mingo to be your future number 1 wide receiver. be your future number one wide receiver. Eric says Bryan Bresee's bench press was the worst in combat with only 22 reps. That was wide receiver stronger than him. 22 reps is not bad for a defensive lineman. It's also not bad for a guy with 33-inch arms. With his frame, that's not bad. To give you a reference, by the way, his RAS score with that 22 bench reps was 9.61. That is elite in every way. 9.61 is one of the better scores that you can have. It's one of the best scores in the past decade. Yeah, there's some guys who are better, Jalen Carter. That's still really good. I'm not super worried about that. And if you watch Bresee's tape, he's got strength. Now, the difference is if you're comparing like Jalen Carter's tape versus Bryan Bresee's tape, you're like, well, damn, he's not as strong as Jalen Carter. But I will remind everybody that Jalen Carter is the best player in the entire draft. My opinion. Is Adebawore a defensive end or a defensive tackle? If he came to New Orleans, he'd be a defensive end. Carol says people mistake reps and power, different muscle fibers, different training for each. There is some transferability in terms of knowledge from bench press to on-field power. But I'll say this. If you watch Bresee's tape, you don't think that he's weak. I'm not saying you think that he's just ragdolling people. He's not taking the hump move and just throwing 330-pound guards across the line, but you don't look at Bresee's tape and think that he's weak. Length will really be a detriment at times when it comes to bench press. Whereas if you have a guy that's got like 31-inch arms, you ever notice like these smaller guards will like bench rep like 35 reps? They got 30-inch arms. They're barrel chested. They're really closed in. They're not 6'6". There are some body types and muscles types that are more, advantageous to doing those type of lifts. So you just can't take them at, eyesight. Doesn't mean they're not important, just it doesn't tell the whole story. So what happened to Foskey? He was mocked high in the first round. I didn't ever really see him as a first-round player. I'm not saying he's bad. I'm saying I never saw him as a first-round player. I do think that he's completely legit if you want to take him in the second. I'm not going to argue that. I'm not going to have a problem with it, but I probably didn't ever have him as a first-round type of guy because he's developmental. And that's the thing for me, man. Guys that are developmental, I struggle with. And he's a slightly smaller than what you typically see New Orleans take. So, the thing with Foskey, when you're talking New Orleans, he is the best, or he is at his best when he's playing like a wide 9 alignment. He uses his speed to attack the arc. He is not a great downfield attacker in a run defense position, which is something that you see New Orleans require a lot of from their defensive ends, both Cameron Jordan and Davenport last year. That was a big thing. If you were the end man on the line of scrimmage, especially as the backside guy, you had got to dominate and maintain containment and know your role. I don't think that he's bad. I think that he's a good pursuit guy. I'm just saying that I don't really see him as a first rounder compared to other edge guys that are out there, but I would be completely okay with taking that type of pick. Out of the two, between like Keon White and Foskey, I'd rather have White. Again, this is just if we're talking about fitting to New Orleans, that's what I would do. So, Bresee has great hands as well, long arms. It's not just about power. Agreed, 992. It's one thing that if you want to go look at an example of why power isn't everything, and I realize that, injury played a role here, so take it for a grain of salt, I guess. But go back to Sheldon Rankins. Like Sheldon Rankins, I think he put up 26 bench reps, but Sheldon Rankins was a hands guy. It was never about how strong Sheldon Rankins was. Sheldon Rankins won with technique, mental processing, finesse, etc. There are great defensive linemen who dominated with great bench press scores. Like, if you talk about the Aaron Donalds put out like 35 reps. Aaron Donald's also a generational talent. Like, it was insane, and he outplayed his size. He was just ridiculous. But I think that if you watch Bresee, you see him not losing on tape due to power. So, yeah. Just things to keep in mind. Any good safeties left? Well, honestly, Trevane, no safeties have even come off the board yet. And the best safety on the action. Now, I don't necessarily think this was a great safety class, like, we're just being real. But yeah, you've got Brian Branch, who I didn't think New Orleans would take in round 1, because in round 1, New Orleans is really, 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 really picky really picky about athletic traits. Like they not only look at how your traits are on tape, but if you look, I think it's over the past like 10 years, New Orleans has not drafted a player with a RAS of less than 7 in the past decade. They really value not only you being a good football player, but having high athletic potential. Which Brian Branch, even though I think that he puts out better tape than he tested, he had a really bad testing when it came to his athletic measurables. But he's probably a guy that could come in and start as maybe a dime guy for New Orleans, but could very well end up being your future free safety starter. And he's a guy that you can take in the second round. So there are definitely players to take if you're looking at them taking a safety, or you're saying, hey, that's probably what I think New Orleans needs the most now. I'm not super confident in the long-term viability there. So you've got Brian Branch, you've got Jari Brown, Sidney Brown, Jordan Battle, the other safety out of Bama, but he's a little bit more honey badger than he is like Brian Branch to that free safety spot. But you definitely got tons of safeties there if that's what you're looking at. Mozzie Smith at 34 reps. Yeah, Mozzie Smith is a ridiculously good one tech, though. Mozzie Smith is not going to dominate as a pass rusher, but he could be very Vince Wilfork, where he's a dominant one tech who also can rush the passer, and you love having those type of guys. They're rare, man. A one tech who can also be a pass rusher is rare. But he's, Mozzie Smith's somebody that probably plays 35% of your snaps every game. So, something like that. Something like that. Lester says we spent all that time, months to draft this. I mean, yeah, Lester, I don't see a problem with it. Now, I'll be honest, Lester. This is all relative and it's opinion based. But like if I look at what's available, I'll be honest. If they would have taken Foskey at 29, then I would have been a little frustrated because I think you're reaching for the same thing you did with Davenport and Turner. I think if you would have taken even Keon White, I think you'd have been reaching for more potential than what has value right now. Bryan Bresee has a ton of value right now. Is it exciting? No. But again, I go back to the analogy. It's like eating your vegetables. You don't like it, but you need it. And it wasn't like they had a lot of the big names available. Again, Murphy went off the board the pick before. I think that probably would have been New Orleans' pick. You go back to the run at wide receiver. Starting at 20, Seattle took who was my favorite receiver to New Orleans in Jackson Smith. And then Quentin Johnson, the other, first round wide receiver who fit that style that New Orleans needed, he went the next pick to the Chargers. And unless you wanted New Orleans to, trade up and get pay a high price for Quentin Johnson, well, then your receiver position for first round receivers was gone. So who was really available that they could pick that fit this team and was also high ranking in their draft? Brian says they would have taken Mike Mayer. Sure, maybe. My only rebuttal to that would be he's literally still available. And when I look at the second round of the draft, I don't sit there and go, well, he's definitely gone next pick. Because here is who's picking before New Orleans tomorrow. Steelers, Cardinals, Lions, who maybe, the way they're picking, Colts, Rams, Raiders, Panthers, and then Seahawks. Those are your 8 teams picking before New Orleans. Do I think a tight end goes to any of those teams? Maybe one of them. We'll see, though. You never know how the draft is going to roll out. But it's quite possible that if that was your pick, it's going to be there at 40 anyway. Boss is considering how much the Saints struggled against Arthur Smith's scheme last season, and they're adding Robinson loading up on run stuffy DTs wouldn't be that bad of an idea. Well, they already did that, though, Bob. They did that with Kalen Saunders. They did that with Nate Shepard. Like, they've actually already done that. Now, I'm not saying that you can't get somebody else. In fact, if you love defensive tackles, like if you want a run-stopping defensive tackle, which is completely okay, there's a legit one still waiting if that's what you want. Like, that's available. One tech's fall. Siaki Ika at a Baylor is still right there. Like, so if you are one of those guys that like, hey, they've got to have a run-stopping nose. If you were one of those, because the Saints have done this before, which is fine. They've run 2 one-techs at a time. Like, if they need to stop the run, there's been years in recent history where they'll bring in both of them to stuff both A-gaps. And if you want that, there are multiple players like that available right now. Like, if you want that, it is there. It is there. Gervin Dexter out of Florida is another guy who can do that same thing. A little bit smaller, a little bit, I wouldn't call him a tweener, but can also rotate as a 3, but probably better as, stopping those ones and everything. Stopping double teams as a 1. But you've got guys there. So, where you rank the Saints in the NFC right now? I rank the Saints in the NFC South as the best team. And honestly, that's all that matters. You work out everything else after that. But right now, I think that the New Orleans Saints are the best team in their division. And that's all that honestly matters. If you win your division, you worry about everything else afterwards. Justin says, since you're a BPA guy, would you have taken Will Levis? No, because I don't believe he's a first-round talent. Charles, thank you for supporting the channel. Hudak, and God bless. You are amazing. I appreciate the love there, man. But really, and I'm not saying that even at 40, I would take him. But I don't think that he was a first-round talent. I really don't. So, no, I personally would not have taken him. By the way, if you're watching the show right now, real quick plug, we're going to get back to our analysis, and we'll even read some scouting reports from what other scouts say about Bryan Bresee. But if you want to check it out, hit up the RevDeuce.com merch store. We've got 3 different items you get to support the podcast. We'll also have some cool merch. We've got the Pull the Trigger mug, the Pull the Trigger t-shirt, Yankee concept on the front, as well as the Hudak Confessional retro t-shirt. Support the channel, rock some cool Saints merch. Check it out. Now, Mr. Don says that he likes Hendon Hooker above Will. I like Will more to New Orleans. But I would also be okay with Hooker. But I've also said that I would like him in like round 3, not round 2. I think Hooker has more that needs developing, but is safer than Will. Does that make sense? I think Hooker has more things that need to get better, but he's also safer. So, do you think the Bengals stole Myles Murphy from us? Personally, yes. I'm not basing that off anything but an educated guess. But I do think that the Saints would have taken Myles Murphy. Who knows, though? It could be one of those things that comes out and they say, nope, we always wanted Bresee. And we'll see. Do you like the cloud of players available to us at 40? Seems like we have good options. I love it. I really do. Like, if you look at who's available, just look at overall players. Put the quarterbacks to the side or whatever, but you talk about the Saints needing a tight end to pair with Juwan Johnson. You got multiple alike. Luke Musgrave, Mike Mayer, even Darnell Washington out of Georgia. Good names there. Really nice players available. If you are saying, hey, we want to beef up our offensive line, Steve Avila and Osiris Torrance, my top 2 guards are still right there. Right there. Top 2 guards to New Orleans, right there. Wide receiver, still 2 names I think fit what New Orleans needs, who can also play down in the slot, right there. There's some really good positions available for New Orleans to go wherever route they want to go. So, yeah, I am pretty excited. And defensive end, there are probably, 3 defensive ends, I would say, that fit New Orleans. And we're talking about there only being 8 picks in the way. There are easily 10 players I could rattle off that I would love New Orleans to take, and there's only 8 picks. So, when it comes to, bubble, yeah, I love it. So, Don says he's safer. That's why I like him more. That's completely fair. Bim says the merch is fire, super comfy. I appreciate that, man. I appreciate it. All the support helps. Podcast, keep going. Would the Saints possibly draft 2 defensive tackles back-to-back? I doubt that. It's possible, but I doubt it. But I've also been one that I've been very loud. I don't think that New Orleans was going to take a 1 tech in the first round anyway, because that's why you got Saunders. Now, 2 dudes, 1 sack says should have taken Nolan Smith. I will continue to stand on my platform to say that I don't believe Nolan Smith was even on their first-round radar, but I understand why people wanted him. I mean, and good friends of mine who coached the game wanted him to come to New Orleans. And I get it. I don't think that he was ever on their radar, so he wasn't on mine. I just said Bresee was one of the 5 that was on the list tonight. There you go. Jay Smooth says they should take Siaki next round. Go for it. I wouldn't, but go for it. I completely get it. Of all the choices, who do you hope drops to us? So when you ask me that, are you asking me who I think fits the team the best, or who I love the best, as in who do I think is the best player left that fits New Orleans? There's 2 different things. Who I think fits the team best and also fits a need, or who do I think the best available player is that fits New Orleans? It's 2 different answers. So Rudy says, I love the pick. I would have loved Cansey despite his measurables, but I love Bresee as my second choice if we missed out. There you go. The biggest thing with Bresee is going to be, can he be healthy? Can he play? If that's the case, there you go. That's all that really matters. The guy says, who's the best for the Saints? Oh, man, this is the good one. So there are a couple names I can give you, but the best people available that I think would fit New Orleans is one, Osiris Torrance out of Florida, offensive guard. Do you need it? If Dr. Billy Oshie was in our chat, who's one of our regulars, he would say that you do because Anders Pete's not going to play 17 games. So if you take a guard, odds are they're going to end up starting. But that one is like right up there. Or Steve Avila, either one. I love both of them. Either one of them comes in and bam, probably starts this year and gives you a future guard for a long time. So that's one of my key ones, like right up at the top. I would also say that Keon White could come in and immediately start unless you are out there and you just 100% believe in Peyton Turner. And if you believe that Dennis Allen believes in Peyton Turner like that, A-okay. But those would probably be my top two. But there's several names in there. Yeah, buddy says Mingo or Mayer. I'm good with either one of those New Orleans. Both make sense. Both make complete sense. We could have got him in the second round because Nolan Smith's a better pick. Hashima, I will, again, stand on this. Nolan Smith was never a Saints consideration. He doesn't fit New Orleans. He doesn't fit New Orleans. Doesn't make him a bad player. And I'll say this real quick. It's a big difference. But I honestly don't even think he was on New Orleans' even radar. Like, did they scout him? And would they have taken him if he fell far enough? Sure. Was he ever in, like, their super small bubble of first-round picks? I don't think he was. Which is why he didn't get picked, by the way. I don't think that they skipped him. And he was like secretly their best player. I don't even think he was there. George says, so are you saying Breezy's a good player with less potential than a guy like Keon White, but he has a high floor? Well, Jordan, they play two different positions. So I don't even have them in the same kind of conversation. Keon White is edge guy. He's basically a prototype 7-tech, which is exactly what New Orleans uses at defensive end. Bryan Bresee, prototype 3-tech. Two different positions. So I don't think they have anything to do with each other. Les says we're getting run defense. What about pass rusher? Well, I will say, yes, I do still want the New Orleans Saints to get more pass rush. 100% agreement. But I also think that Bryan Bresee is giving you that. Bryan Bresee is a better 3-tech than anything that you had available interior-wise right now. And I think he's got good upside. I mean, I don't say this in like a mean way, but Bryan Bresee is like you hit the reset button on David Onyemata. David Onyemata never hit his potential. Never. David Onyemata never got close to hitting his potential. The same reasons you loved David Onyemata are some of the same reasons you love Bryan Bresee, but Bryan Bresee is actually more refined coming into the league than Onyemata was. There's a big difference there. Onyemata wasn't a first-round pick, but just to give you what you remember about a player, same idea. Onyemata was a 4th-round guy. Like, you knew he was developmental. But Onyemata also was with New Orleans, 7 years, 7, and never became what you wanted him to become. Still a good player, but never hit that ceiling that you saw in him. Bryan Bresee is years ahead of where Onyemata was coming into the league. Now, Onyemata also had to learn more of the game, all that, blah, 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 blah. But Bryan Bresee has that too. If he's healthy. If. Two Dudes says, does anyone really like Allen? I mean, he said NFL is a quarterback's game, but yet he kept Dalton in when Winston was healthy. Well, I'll be honest, Two Dudes, and we can agree or disagree with this decision, and I'll sit there and do it with you. I think that he believes Andy Dalton gave them the best chance to win. So. Yeah, Gotti, I'm definitely saying it on purpose, man. What do you mean? Of course I'm saying it on Breezy on purpose. Of course I'm saying it on purpose, man. Come on, bro. It's New Orleans. Of course I'm saying Breezy on purpose. The Onyemata was a 5th rounder. Onyemata went, 120 overall in the 4th round. Yeah, something like that. I think it was like pick 120. It was middle of the 4th, 2016. Yeah. Random nerd fact. compared to Rankins? Like, are you asking me to compare Sheldon Rankins to Bryan Bresee? Is that what you're asking? We got good value out of Onyemata? You definitely got good value out of a 4th-round pick, and I'll not argue that at all. You spent a 4th-round pick and got a 7-year player who was a 5-year or 4-year full-time starter with David Onyemata. That is hella great value for a 4th-round pick. But I think everybody would also still say that David Onyemata never lived up to the potential that we saw in him. Would most people in chat agree with that? Like, when we saw him, when we saw the flashes, and we even have like Cameron Jordan talking about it, Ryan Nielsen talking about it, we saw David Onyemata having like elite flashes, but he never became elite. But in terms of value, still fantastic. Do you trust the Saints medical staff with this pick? No, I don't. I'm not here to argue in defense of the Saints medical staff. I will argue in defense of the pick because I do believe that Bresee can be that type of a dude. But I'm not here to try to pretend and defend that medical staff that has clearly had some problems. Clearly has some problems. So, yeah. If we're drafting a tight end, I'd rather do a developmental guy like Zach Kuntz with elite athleticism in the 4th round. I'm okay with that too, John. I'm okay with it. Look, I think if you're sitting out there going, I want them to pick this, truth is, there are so many good names and good positions right now for New Orleans that you should be happy. You should be happy, right? I think that you should. If you are watching this, New Orleans is in the best spot they've been in, and I personally am ecstatic they didn't draft up. I'm so glad they didn't trade up. And they talked about it. I don't know if y'all saw the news this morning. New Orleans was talking to multiple teams about trading up. Now, they do that all the time. But with New Orleans, it's a little bit different because you expect them to actually do it. They were talking to a lot of teams about moving up, and they didn't. And I'm actually happy about that. And now they're going to pick the 9th pick in the 2nd round. They've got the 8th pick in the 3rd round and the 13th pick in the 4th round. And the next 75 picks, they've got 3 of them. I'm happy. I am. So, not to diminish the ACL injury, but it's probably less of a red flag for DT than a wide receiver, running back, or cornerback. Honestly, I would say no. The reason being is anything ankle or foot related is a hell of a lot harder when you're 300 pounds. Check out Zion Williamson. And I'm not saying that Bresee hasn't recovered, because he has. He's literally got tape playing football recovered. What I'm saying is anything knee, ankle, I know I said ankle with ACL, but anything knee, ankle, anything lower body with a lineman is a concern. My head read ACL as Achilles, but I know he had an ACL injury. Anything lower body is a concern when you're a 300-pound human being. Human beings are not supposed to be 300 pounds. Like, you become 300 pounds because you want to be elite as an athlete. But if you look at what a lot of offensive linemen and defensive linemen do after they get out of the league, they slim down. Like, you'll see offensive linemen go from being 320 play weight till they'll retire 3 years later, they're weighing 240. So anytime you weigh 300 pounds, any lower leg injury is something that you will constantly worry about. King Arthur says, why not take Smith? I think it's okay with go a hype player sometimes versus prospects that work with Olave. Simple answer, King Arthur. Chris Olave fit the New Orleans Saints. He was a prototype flanker for a West Coast offense. Nolan Smith doesn't fit anything New Orleans does. Simple answer. If the Saints didn't trade for Olave, who do you think the Saints would have taken with pick number 10? I would like to think that New Orleans would have got Jalen Carter. Yeah, 992. I corrected myself. Okay. I would like to think they got Jalen Carter. And Jalen Carter is like having 3 Bryan Bresees. Like having 3 of them. So, yeah. I know sacks aren't that important, but is Bresee capable of a 10-sack season? My rebuttal to you, Jordan, and I'm saying this just to see if you know. How many 3-techs in the NFL in the past 5 years have averaged 10 sacks or more? Do you know? Do you know? Just because I want to set realistic expectations. That's why I asked that question. I'm not trying to ask that question as like a butthole. I'm trying to be legitimately. How many do that? Because I think with a 3-tech, You have to understand expectation is not 10 sacks average a year. If you do that, fantastic. That's not the expectation. You would love that, but that's not a realistic expectation for a 3-tech. And by the way, the only 3-tech that I can think of that has averaged 10 sacks a year for the past 5 years is Aaron Donald. One. That's it. Fletcher Cox hasn't done it. Geno Atkins didn't do it, and that's going back a little bit. I can't think of a single one that's done it over the past 5 years, averaging 10 sacks. Now, that doesn't mean that you haven't had them that have reached there. Like Fletcher Cox, in his whole career, has got one 10-sack season. And Fletcher Cox is the Leroy Glover of this era. Like, if there wasn't Aaron Donald in the way, Fletcher Cox might be the best 3-tech of the past 15 years, past 20 years. Like, it's saying they're Leroy Glover. Nobody talks about how great Leroy Glover was because Warren Sapp existed. Leroy Glover was insane. Fletcher Cox is insane. He's got 1 year. 1 year. 10 sacks or more. So 6 sacks, far more realistic expectation. And if he can do that consistently, that's a really good player. Now, I did see somebody brought up Chris Jones. Good bring up. Chris Jones here's what he's done. Over the past 5 years, 15.5, 9, 7.5, 9, 15.5. Chris Jones is a little bit different because typically they do run a 3-man front, which makes him more of a 5 than a 3. But if he was a 4-3 player, he would be a 3-tech. So I'll give you Chris Jones if we want to go Chris Jones. It's slightly different, but at the same time, not terribly. So we can take Chris Jones. That's completely okay. Then we would have 2. I'm just saying, I was all saying this to make realistic expectations. Realistic expectations for a 3-tech is not that a rookie comes in and gets 10 sacks. But if it happens, that's fantastic. Realistic expectations is you're looking for 6, and that's really good. Look at Sheldon Rankins when he was in New Orleans. Sheldon Rankins' best year was 8. And when Sheldon Rankins hit 8 in 2018, I will argue that for that 1 year, 2018, Sheldon Rankins was probably top 3 defensive tackles at 3-tech in the NFL for 1 year. And then injuries, of course, derailed everything that he had. But when he hit his peak in 2018, like he had finally gotten healthy in 2017, he came in 2018, dominated. He was probably number 3 in terms of defensive tackles as a 3-tech. And then it fell off because next year happened and then blah, 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 blah. But yeah, 6 is my number. And if he can do that, there we go. Yeah, Rudolph does a good way to describe it as well. 3-techs cause more sacks than get them. That's big. Because when you play a 3-tech, not only do you have penetration assignments, like you need to get upfield to get a sack, but you've also got containment that you've got to run. A lot of times the defensive tackle will be in charge of being the point man in the twist stunt game. So their role is multifaceted, and the box score does not always tell the value of what a 3-tech provides. So reason not be able to stay healthy. Why in the hell do the Saints keep taking these injury-prone guys in the first round? Brian, I honestly can't speak to the injury aspect because I don't know what's going to happen there. I can only say that, yes, there was an ACL injury, so he did have a knee problem, a year and a half ago. Yes, there was shoulder surgery a year ago. But there you go. That's all I can really say on that. I'm not a doctor. I can't speak beyond that. Gregory says, this pick makes me think Sean Payton listened to DA about picking Davenport and Turner. Maybe. I can't speak to that either because I don't really know anything about that, right? Like, I'll just have to be like, yep, I'm ignorant. No clue. Can't really speak to it. So, yeah, that's cool. Everybody's opinion is welcome. We're going to get a few more before we wrap up. Can't believe we're almost an hour after this draft happened. It's been a crazy, crazy draft. If y'all do want to support the show, 300 of y'all here. If I get 5 people to buy a t-shirt, it makes my night. Appreciate y'all. If you want to rep Saints gear for this upcoming season, I would strongly encourage you to check out the Pull the Trigger t-shirt. Why do I love the Pull the Trigger t-shirt? Because I believe that Hoodoo Confessional fans are some of the most knowledgeable Saints fans in the world. And if you're going to be watching Derek Carr this year, you might very well be screaming, pull the trigger. Well, one of the most common staples that you see them run is called the Yankee concept. It's here on the t-shirt. It's a big thing that we talk about. Rep your Saints is also rep some of the plays. Show your football knowledge. Check it out. Can't go wrong. I mean, $24 for a t-shirt. You pay more from that at the corner. You got it. Rep New Orleans. Let's see if we get any comments we can grab before we wrap up. Rich says, I was very high on Rankins coming to the Saints during the draft. How does he compare to Bryan Bresee? I would say Bresee is a much better, we're only talking healthy, right? He's a much better all-around player than Rankins was coming into the draft. We're talking about run stopping, mental processing, etc. Rankins was a better pass rusher coming into the draft. I do like both of them. Bresee a little bit more well-rounded. Rankins a more developed pass rusher coming in. George says DA likes smaller edge rushers like Khalil Mack and Von Miller. So what's your issue with Nolan Smith? Jordan, we actually went through this. There's no proof that that's how DA is. Historically, DA does not actually do that. The only time he's generally done that is when there was a Ryan around. I mean, you can use one example, but if you actually look at every defensive end that's actually played defensive end for Dennis Allen, most of them have been Peyton Turner, Marcus Davenport types. Yes, there's Khalil Macks. They exist. But you go to when DA was a D-line coach, you go to when he was a coordinator, head coach, generally he has a prototype build he goes after. And there are generational people that exist. Khalil Mack, Von Miller are both generational people. Nolan Smith is not generational. I do think that Nolan Smith is an insane athlete, but his tape is not generational, which is why he wasn't picked in the top 10. If he had been a generational player, like when you talk about a guy being a blue chip, like you think that he's really going to be one of the best at his position his entire football career, like Khalil Mack was, like Von Miller was, Nolan Smith did not put out that tape. Nolan Smith did not put out I'm a blue chip talent tape. He did not. Did he put out good tape? Yes. Did he put out insane athletics? Yes. But he didn't put out I'm a blue chip player, which is why he went at the very end of the first. I still think he's good. But I do think that Nolan Smith, and this isn't his fault, is a great example of draft Twitter hyping up a guy and making it sound like all 32 teams would love to have him. And that's just not the case. But just about all 32 teams would love to have Khalil Mack. But not all 32 teams would like to have Nolan Smith. Hart says, sorry if it's been discussed, but how do you feel about trading draft capital if what was said about Commanders willing to deal Young? Like for us to go after Young? Depends on the cost. Depends on the cost. Do I think the Saints use all their picks? I still think the Saints trade up at some point. I thought they would have traded up today. So do I think the Saints end up with 8 picks? No. Would I like them to? Yes. The only time I'd be okay if they traded up is, let's see, they've got 2 7th rounders and a 5th. They've actually got 2 5ths and 2 7ths. So if they took a 1st, 2nd, 3rd, 4th, and then 5th, and then they traded their remaining 3 picks to get back into like early 5th, or they went into the 4th again, and they ended up with 6, I'd be okay with that. So, what do you think about Tank Dell in the 3rd? I'd rather New Orleans take like Tajay Spears in the 3rd than Tank Dell, but I'd be okay with Tank Dell in the 3rd or 4th. If y'all are new to the channel, one thing I'm big on is starting round 3 is where developmental talent and niche specific fits are A-okay. A guy like Tank Dell, I'm completely okay with in the 3rd. And picks 5, 6, and 7, like rounds 5, 6, 7, I don't care what you do. You could pick a punter, kicker, quarterback, doesn't matter. Rounds 5 through 7, basically day 3 picks are almost no different than a UDFA. Almost no different than a UDFA. So, Von Miller was different, man. It's insane how much pressure he has put up in his career. I mean, yeah, there are some guys who are just wildly different. And they come out every year, and they're called blue chip talents. Like, you just look at them and go, it would take something drastic to happen to prevent this guy from being good. Like, it would take something drastic. You know, like, even Khalil Mack, you could argue, has maybe had a down past couple of years as he's gotten 30 plus now, but he's still been damn good. Yeah, and Von Miller, same. And I also argue that Khalil Mack's bigger than Nolan Smith is anyway. But both of them have been damn good. And if it honestly hadn't been for the ankle injury with Von Miller that he missed a year, Von Miller might already be closing in on 150 sacks. I think he's at like 125 in his career. Had he not missed, 2020, Von Miller might be approaching 150 sacks. So, Two Dude says, I could see us taking Will Levis. I honestly wouldn't have a problem with that in a second. I'm not super big on it, but I wouldn't like throw a hissy fit over it. I would rather have taken Bresee at number 29, though. We think about 2 running backs going early. I think it's hilarious. And even though I do think that Robinson is the best running back in this class, and I do think that he's a really good player, bad teams draft running backs early. It just doesn't have value. It doesn't have value. You don't see tight ends, running backs, nose tackles winning you more games. Doesn't mean they can't make your team better. But if you're a team like Atlanta that has an awful defense, I know you say you're, all in on Desmond Ridder, but are you really? A running back is not going to win you more games, just like Kyle Pitts did not win them more games. They make the team better, but they are not actually moving the needle. If you're Atlanta, you need to move the needle. And I was actually really happy with Carolina's draft. I don't think Carolina's draft makes them better in 2023. Now, long term, yes, the quarterback pick scares me for Carolina because I do think that he could be good. But year one, I'm not scared at all about Carolina's quarterback. I think Bryce Young could be a dang good player, but I'm not scared about him right now. I'm scared about him next year, the year after, and as he develops and he gets better and he starts working on some of his weaknesses, which is he'll follow up receivers too far up the boundary, which NFL safeties can turn into interceptions. His deep ball is not as exciting as some other guys. So how does he work with that when it comes to operating the pocket? I think that his lower body mechanics need some perfection to really become better. And overall, you're going to have that worry about durability because of a smaller frame. I do think that Bryce Young is going to be a good quarterback. As long as he stays healthy, I think he can definitely be a good quarterback. I love how he operates the scramble drill. I think he has great poise as a quarterback. Love all the traits. But I don't think in year one he leads the team to the playoffs. But I do think long-term it's definitely a great pick for Carolina as long as he stays healthy. But no pick that a NFC South team has made probably wins them more games. I would say that the team that comes closest to doing that was New Orleans. Gibbs to the Lions at 12 seems crazy, especially when they have Swift. Not only do they have Swift, they have also got hold on. I'm blanking because we're talking about it and it's midnight. But not only do they have Smith, but they also just signed David Montgomery. I know David Montgomery passed, maybe past the expiration date for some people. Not as exciting for some people, but I think David Montgomery's fine. I know coming off IR, maybe not everybody's excited about it. But I think they had 2 legitimate running backs in Detroit. And then to take a guy at pick 12 at running back was wild to me. But we'll see how it works out for him. You see the Saints trading for any established players? No. Unless they just found a great deal. But no. So, do we think the Saints trade up for Joey Porter Jr. in the second? Maybe. The only negative I have about Joey Porter Jr. is, do they need him? That's literally the only negative. It's literally the only negative. You've got 3 very freaking good corners. And yes, that does mean I'm still giving love to Paulson and Debo. I'm not going to let 1 year and throw him away. Where do you have room for Joey Porter? But in terms of fit to New Orleans, I love him to New Orleans. Would love him. Nation says he thinks Steelers are taking Joey Porter. It's possible. I think of you talk about what there being 8 picks between New Orleans and their next pick. I would say that that's a possibility. We'll wait and see. Talking about round 2, Steelers pick at 32, since you have one less pick in round 1 this year. Pick 32 is the Steelers, and they might take him first overall. They've got, 17 hours to think about it. I really love this pick. He could play the 09 shade if he's healthy. I think this could be a home run pick. Well, Mike, I will say that I don't think that he can play 0 through 9 because I don't think that Bryan Bresee can do 9 tech successfully in the NFL. I guess he could, but I don't think he's ready to do it now. But I do think that he's versatile. I do think that he could be really good, but I do love him in the interior. So, what time is round 2? I think round 2 starts at 7 tomorrow, or is it 5? Let's see. NFL Draft Friday time. Let's see. When does this coverage start? Starts at 6 p.m. Central Standard Time. 6 p.m. Central. Would you have been okay with Mike Mayer? Personally, no. But I'll just go ahead and tell you why. I am of the philosophy that there are a couple positions you never take in the first round because they do not have value in year one. They do not provide a lot of year one value. Running back, tight end, nose tackle are like the top three in that argument. Doesn't mean I don't like him. Just that history shows tight ends don't do a ton for you coming in their first year from the first round. They just don't. Doesn't mean I don't think they can contribute, but yeah, that's my logic. And some people are going to argue, well, Rev, does it really matter if you took it, 9 picks later? Maybe not to you, but it matters to me. Will I be live tomorrow at Leicester? Sadly, I will not. I will talk draft, but I will be streaming on my Twitch channel. I'll be doing some gaming tomorrow, but I will still be talking NFL draft tomorrow on Twitch. If y'all want to come join the Twitch channel, y'all can, but we will be gaming and then having the draft up. So it won't be dedicated like we are right now. Y'all are more than welcome to come hang out. We'll be doing some Diablo 3 and probably doing a little bit of Star Trek Fleet Command, which is the main game I do for my gaming channel. But we'll also have the NFL draft up. We'll be talking about throughout the whole process because, believe it or not, nerds are also fans of football. Anyway, Jamie says, sorry if this has been talked about already, but do you think Breezy's first year stats will be, can he get 5+ sacks? I would say first year, assuming that he is a full-time starter, which I expect him to be, if he's healthy, 4 to 6 sacks is my expectation for him. 4 to 6. I would even say that probably doesn't even get one in the first 4 games. It is possible, but 4 to 6 is my number. As a rookie, a lot depends on what happens around him, but that would be my expectation for a first-round defensive tackle that plays 3 tech, no matter who the name was. That would have been my expectation for Kalijah Cansey. Jalen Carter's probably the only guy that I would have said 6 on. Like I would have said 6 is his floor. That's what I expect out of him. I understand your philosophy with tight end. I'm new to the channel. Definitely check you out more. Appreciate it, Nation. Yeah, again, everybody's welcome. I hope you hit the follow button if you're here. I hope you like it if you're here. We are right at over an hour, so I'm going to wrap up so we can get this out on iTunes, Google Play, etc. If y'all do want to have more Saints coverage, I will be doing a film study on Bryan Bresee that will launch on this channel probably Sunday or Monday. We'll do a film study on him. We'll do a film study on every draft pick New Orleans does. We will also discuss UDFAs. Next podcast is Tuesday, 7 p.m. Central Standard Time, right here on the channel. And again, if y'all do want to get more of this, join our Discord and check out the Twitch channel if y'all want to talk tomorrow and a little bit Saturday about NFL draft. Appreciate every single one of y'all. Everybody that came through. Y'all are amazing. Hope you've had a fun night. If you agree or disagree with the pick, I still hope that you rep Who Dats forever. Who dat? God bless. I'll catch you on the next podcast. Deuces, that's me. We're outie. Roll it.